the thing to do because they figured
Listening
the court was
to
going to shut
Annette
down
Gordon
the freedom
Reed
of choice plans,
on
and they
Fresh
did. The
Air with
Supreme
Terry
Court did
Gross,
in
talking
1968,
about
and then
her
everybody had to
new
switch
project,
schools.
new book
The black kids that had to
about
be dispersed
Juneteenth.
throughout the schools, and I was already
I'll
there.
stop
I was
talking, let her
already
talk.
twice when that happened.
So they did this to make sure that when the Supreme Court struck down the freedom of choice plan, that you would be in a good school.
That I would be in place. I would not have to move anywhere. Now, this is an explanation that came afterwards. I think I know my parents somewhat soured on immigration, and so their reasoning for why they did that kind of changed over time. A different story over time about what this was all about, and it went from being something that I don't think they wanted to appear too idealistic, and so they tried to make it sound like, oh, this is a practical thing to do, when I suspect, from knowing them and knowing other things about them, that they were idealistic about this. They thought that this was part of the civil rights movement, and they were making a statement with this. But when they became disillusioned with immigration in our town, they switched.
I don't know how this is working.
Which is, for historian, it's wonderful looking at this to think about the motivation
coming up soon.
Actors in the past, how they switch, why they're doing things and the actions they take. But I think that happened with them.
Why did your parents sour on integration?
Because I think they thought it was a one-way street. That one of the things that happens that we don't talk about as much is that when schools were integrated in many communities, black teachers were taken out of the classroom. My mother remained as a teacher. She was a 10th grade English teacher. She remained in the classroom and was very talented and did lessons planned for the district and all that kind of thing. But in many communities, black teachers were taken out of the classroom, and black students lost them as role models.
When you say taken out of the classroom, do you mean they were fired?
Yeah, or moved into non-teaching positions, to administrative positions, things like that, to the library or whatever, things where they were not in the classroom teaching. So black students didn't have role models, and it's important for white students to see black teachers as leaders as well. And so they thought that there's integration, but it's like Blackstone said about husband and wife. They became one, and the one was him. So it wasn't a reciprocity here, where we're giving you our kids, but you won't give us your kids. So they thought that was a problem. There was a loss of a sense of community on the part of, they could see how the black community responded to this. Many people hated losing Booker T because it was a place where the teachers knew the students. They lived in the same community. They were sometimes their relatives. There was a connection. My white teachers at Anderson were wonderful to me, but it wasn't the same. We were Texans. We had things in common, but we had been separated by race. We've been separated in communities, and it was a different feel to it, I think. So they didn't think that they got everything they bargained. It wasn't as great as they thought it was going to be.
You described how you felt as a 6-year-old when you became this figure of controversy in your neighborhood because your parents were sending you to the white school, and a lot of people saw that as a vote of no confidence in Booker T and the black school in the community. And what was it like for you to be controversial in both places? You were controversial in the white school because you were the only black student. You were controversial in your own neighborhood because you were being sent by your parents to a white school, even though your mother was a teacher in the black school.
Well, it was weird because there were people who knew me and I didn't know them. And there were people who were either positive, because I'm not saying all black people felt this way. There were some people who were positive about this, thought it was a good thing, and there were some people who thought it was a bad thing. And all the way, I described the scene with this guy punching me repeatedly, and I didn't know who he was. So it was this weird thing where there are these people out there who don't like you, and they know you, but you don't know them, and they're threatening to beat you up or hitting you or doing things because they think you have done something. It was almost as if they probably got the message garbled that somehow, I had been the reason everything changed. I was when in fact I was I was a product of it. I didn't instigate it. I didn't make the courts. The Supreme Court decided the Freedom of Choice Plan was a subterfuge, and they had to, integrate the schools as they said in 1954. But people acted as if I had done that, and a lot of kids got the message from their parents, I guess, that I was, I was the reason for this, and they acted accordingly. So it was weird. I've always had this sense, the sense of being watched in some way and being judged by people you don't know, and that's always it's a strange feeling, whether you're a kid or an adult.
How did the end of the Freedom of Choice Plan and the beginning of the integration of schools in your community affect your actual schooling and who you went to school with?
Well, as I got to be older, I ran into something called tracking. I was a good student, and I was tracked into what we called accelerated classes. And I was pretty much separated from black students for for all of high school. I can only think of a class where I had maybe one other black person in my classes.
What was it like to be singled out as exceptional, which separated you from other black students?
It was tough. It was tough. The one saving grace is that I lived in a black community, and I had black friends in that community, even though when we went to school, we weren't in classes together. But when I would come home and on weekends and so forth, I would be in a black community with other girls, other people who were friends. But it was odd because being detached and separated out is something that I'm sort of used to doing, and it might. Yeah, I suppose I'm psychoanalyzing myself. Maybe that accounts for the detachment I'm able to bring to some of the projects and things that I do. Standing outside of things has been, a part of, what I've done from the time that I was little because of the circumstances of how I went to school and where I went to school.
Let me reintroduce you here. If you're just joining us, my guest is Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and Harvard professor Annette Gordon-Reed. Her new book is called On Juneteenth. We'll be right back after a break. This is Fresh Air.
Degrees currently in Norfolk. Look for partly cloudy skies tonight. Lows dropping back around 70. Sunny, warm tomorrow. Highs into the lower 90s. Partly cloudy tomorrow night. Slight chance of an overnight thunderstorm. Lows dropping back lower 70s.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Indeed, with more than 100 skills tests to help businesses quickly attract, interview, and hire the candidates with the skills that align with their job descriptions. Learn more at Indeed.com/credit. And from EBSCO, together with its content partners, providing resources and expanded access to content to help library and healthcare staff support their institutions during the COVID-19 pandemic. EBSCO.com.
This is Fresh Air. Let's get back to my interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and Harvard professor Annette Gordon-Reed. Her new book is called On Juneteenth. It's part memoir, part history, and the history is not only of Juneteenth, which marks the day enslaved people in Texas were freed June 19, 1865. The book is also about how central slavery is to the history of Texas. You've written a couple of books related to the relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, who was enslaved to Jefferson, but was also his mistress. Can we call her that? How would you describe their relationship? You've done so much research into this.
Well, people don't like the word mistress because it sounds like it's consensual, and although that's not necessarily the case, and if you're really looking at it, it's hard to say what it was. I mean, going on what she apparently told her son about all of this when she was in France, instead of opting for her freedom, she got Jefferson to promise that if she came back to Virginia with him, she would live a good life at Monticello, and any children they had would be freed. And that's what happened. So that's all we really know. Once she comes back to Virginia, obviously she's under his control. If she'd had any chance for freedom, it would have been in France, but she gave that up. So we don't really know. I mean, her descendants talk about how he felt about her, that he loved her, but they don't talk about her in relationship, what she thought about him. So this is mysterious. This is something that's would be left to novelists and playwrights.
So it sounds like you resigned to never really learning what she thought of him.
Well, no, yeah, because you don't. I mean, the only thing that we have that she did, well, the two things. Number one, she came back here with him, but that could be because her family was here, and
When she wanted her children to be free.
She wanted her children to be
for
free.
them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
bargaining for them, and I mean, the sort of with the hope that the guy that she would be, this man would treat her okay, and I guess that sort of it's always up in the air in those situations. And when he dies, she keeps some of his possessions to give to her children as heirlooms. So she wanted people to remember that connection, apparently, and that's why she tells the story. But we don't really know. In the absence of any statements from her, we don't know. And because she was totally under his control when she came back from France, it's hard to say. For him, it's hard for me to imagine that a person could have a purely sexual attachment to someone for 38 years. Or 20 years is the span of her childbearing, if you want to make it about sex. But those are sort of loose criteria.
What do you consider some of your greatest contributions to the scholarship surrounding the relationship of Jefferson and Sally Hemings, and what that relationship means both for her and for one of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson?
Well, I think my greatest contribution is what I set out to do in the first book, was to talk about the way people had written about it, the way historians had written about it, essentially saying that there was no evidence that this ever happened. And going through person by person, passage by passage, explaining how they skipped over reasonable inferences to get to one that was comfortable to them, how they denied that this was even a possibility when there was much, how they ignored it when Jefferson's family said things that were obvious lies, treated as if it was nevertheless credible. So it was not about, I think my greatest contribution is not about Tom and Sally had kids. This is how historians wrote about slavery and how they treated the stories of African American people. Because if you can't get this right, I mean, this is, when you think about enslaved people are the objects of oppression, we typically pay attention to them. To those are the people that we pay attention to. We don't spend our time trying to protect the people who are their oppressors. And that's what was happening. So I think that's my biggest contribution. And that can be applied in other contexts, not just about Tom and Sally and kids and whatever, but just in general, how you look, whose stories and whose interests are you paying attention to when you're writing history. And I think that's what I wanted to try to investigate and have people think about.
So I'm going to confess here, I've been a little distracted for the past few minutes because I keep thinking, why did I use the word mistress? The first question about Sally Hemings' relationship with Thomas Jefferson. I mean, she was enslaved to him. I mean, I knew they had a long-term relationship, which is why I clumsily came up with that word. But it's such a wrong word when somebody is basically the property of somebody else.
It's tough because, I mean, he could sell. I mean, the only thing that's interesting about it is that once Martha married Tom, she couldn't refuse him sex either. The only thing he couldn't do would be to sell her, and that's a big deal. But it's a state of unfreedom that meant that, as I said, once she came back to the United States, in France, she, was technically a free person. The way it happened is that you file freedom suits, and every freedom suit that was filed in Paris in the 18th century was granted. And Jefferson basically said, talking to another person, if a slave finds out that they're free here, then there's nothing we can do. So she really had the cards were in her hands in France. She was there with her brother, who's 26, who's literate, had been
Closest
trained as a
UPS
chef,
store.
And they could have stayed. But once she comes back here, you're right. I mean, she's totally under his control.
Did her brother stay in France or come back?
No, he came back. Jefferson frees him after he trained somebody to be a chef, because he brought him over there to teach him how to be a chef, and he paid a lot of money for that. He trained in some of the best kitchens in Paris, and he's freed, and then he goes back. He apparently goes back and travels around Europe for a number of years, and he ends up, it's a sad story, he ends up killing himself. And that's something else we can't find
Good
out
afternoon,
about.
thank you for using EPS Storage. Yeah, I
Jefferson
can help
hired a
you.
detective
Yes,
to
do you
find
have a
out what
notary?
happened, but
Yes, ma'am. We have a notary here until 6:30.
the letter
And how much is
explaining
that?
what the guy said
$5.
is no longer extant.
Thank you.
So
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
we'll probably never figure that one out either.
Let's take a short break here and then we'll talk some more. If you're just joining us, my guest is Pulitzer Prize winning historian and Harvard professor Annette Gordon-Reed. Her new book is called On Juneteenth. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air.
And this is 89.5 WHRV, your public radio station serving Eastern Virginia, coming up at 4 o'clock on All Things Considered. Early in the pandemic, Taiwan was praised for handling COVID-19 well. Now Taiwan is struggling through its worst bout of coronavirus yet. Also, last year, cooped up at home, the band Low Cut Connie began to stream performances. Before long, they turned into a musical support group for fans coping with the pandemic. Those two stories are coming up at 4 o'clock. It's All Things Considered here on 89.5 WHRV.
This is Fresh Air. Let's get back to my interview with Pulitzer Prize winning historian and Harvard professor Annette Gordon-Reed. Her new book is called On Juneteenth. It's part memoir, part history, and the history is not only of Juneteenth, which marks the day enslaved people in Texas were freed, June 19, 1865. The book is also about how central slavery is to the history of Texas.
To the
You
history of
mentioned in your
America.
book about Juneteenth that American history is like really complicated.
Yeah.
The relationship between Hemings and Jefferson is probably another example of that. So you spoke a little earlier about the detachment you had to have when you were seen as this really controversial child because you were integrating a white school.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel a sense of detachment from the history that you're writing so that you can do you try to see things from everybody's point of view, including like the white slave owner's point of view?
I try to see everything from people's points of view. I don't always endorse their points of view.
Right.
But I try to see, because I want to know what happened. If I'm assuming wrong motivations, wrong thoughts, or attributing them to someone, then I'm not really figuring out what is going on here. See, I don't see any point in going to the library if I'm just going to come to the story with my own preconceived notions and my own preferred answers. It's a waste of time to go through all those documents if I don't learn anything from those documents and if I don't think about them. So yeah, I think detachment is important. I mean, there are times when I've looked at slave records going through Jefferson's farm book.
Hi, may I speak with
or
Kendra?
letters, and he's talking
Yes,
about
this is
and
she.
I
Hi, my
remember
name is
time
Sherry
working on
Bailey,
research,
and
someone
Carl
going
West
down and cried.
put you in touch with me regarding the
Thinking
Juneteenth
about
Festival.
a woman who had been
Well,
separated
I
from her
wasn't
children
sure
because
if you
they
guys
were
had
old
anything
enough. They
going
were
on.
10
I
and
was
12.
actually referred to you
And I
guys
thought about my kids
by
and
someone.
how
I
they would
forgot what
feel
his name is. I think it
if
was
I were just down the street from them.
Carl
These kids were
West.
not taken far
yes,
away from
Carl.
their mom.
Yes.
The
Okay.
idea that 10 and 12 would
He
be enough to be separated
referred
from
me
their
to you. Well,
family
my parents ran
was
into him.
just
I was in a
very
play with
upsetting to
him a
me. So
long
there
time
were
ago, and he told me to
the
call you guys to
detachment.
see if you
We
guys
don't
had
feel
anything
detached
going
from it,
on,
but in the main, I
and
try to see
see
things
if
from
maybe I could
as
possibly
many
do something
perspectives
more
Okay.
for you guys.
in a particular
Okay. So
story or the
listen,
issue that I'm writing about.
so do you live in Hampton Roads, or where do you live?
Yes, I live like right at the line of Hampton and Newport News.
Okay. And you have internet that you can go online and check out the Juneteenth website.
Yes, I can.
Okay, and that'll give you a sense of what we're doing. And once you have a chance to do that, we should talk again and see how you would want to be, involved. And there's all sorts of things that are needed. So I'm sure we'll find something that will fit your interest and our needs and so forth. But go to the website, which is www.juneteenthva.org.
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I'm spelling Juneteenth right.
Okay, fair enough. JUNETEENTEENTHVA.org.
Okay.
I think it's very important.
Okay, great. I really appreciate you calling me. I've been anticipating this, so thank you so much.
You're so welcome, my dear. I look forward to chatting with you once you've had a chance to look at the website, okay?
Okay, great.
Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
But I think there ought to be a day to remember what it must have felt like for people who had been treated as property, who feared more than anything the loss of relatives and family members because they were seen as property through sale, through inheritance, the normal operations of the property system, that they lived under the vagaries of all of that. And there was great joy, a great sense of release, and a great sense of hope that existed in those people. And I think one of the ways we can honor that would be to have a day to think about and reflect on what their circumstances were like and what they hoped would happen in the future for their descendants.
Annette Gordon-Reed, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for so much enlightening information about American history.
Thank you for having me.
Annette Gordon-Reed's new book is called On Juneteenth. Tomorrow on Fresh Air, our guest will be Yusuf Salam, one of 5 men who were
Wasn't that wonderful?
teenagers
Talking about Juneteenth on Fresh Air with Annette Gordon-Reed. And we're going to follow up quickly because we're going to be talking about the national holiday and Fort Monroe and adapting her story to the stage. She said she didn't know how Jefferson and Sally Hemings felt about each other. There's no way to speculate from her end as a historian. She said that's the domain of writers and playwrights. She said it. It was just like she reached out and spoke to me about that. I'm so excited.
And Kayla Lattimore. Our associate producer of digital media is Molly C.B. Nesper. Roberta Shoroff directs the show. I'm Terry Gross.
Oh, actually, one more thing. The UPS is where I'm on my way to get the document notarized. That's where I end up going. But I'm gonna also take a sponsorship package to Lowe's there. So all good on the Western Front here.